Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report. This is your source for Black news, views, and opinions. Happy Friday. It is Friday, March 11th. I'm back.
Yes.
Just for a little bit. I'm Brooke Thomas, filling in for my guy, Seth Lemon.
Guess who's back? It's good to have you back in the spot. I am Romeo.
Always great to have our favorite girl, Brooke, back today. I'm Debbie Lobo, and on today's report, Russia expands its unprovoked attacks to western Ukraine, how President Biden and other members of the G7 are responding to Putin's heinous war crimes. Meanwhile, two of the men convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery want their federal hate crimes convictions overturned. So, what's the likelihood of that happening? Then New York has begun certifying businesses to sell marijuana, while the first recipients selected by the state were chosen to right the wrongs of the past.
Plus, if you're traveling anytime soon, beware. Pilots at Delta Airlines are protesting, but how long is their strike expected to last? And after a long week of headlines, we really just need to laugh. So my homie Cedric the Entertainer stopping by to chop it up over this week's hottest topics. It's Friday. We have all that and so much more. And we got Brooke back in the building, so let's get it.
We begin with news out of Ukraine. President Biden is ramping up pressure on Russia as Vladimir Putin continues his bombardment of Ukrainian cities. Today, the Kremlin's unprovoked attacks moved further west for the first time. And as Seth Lemon reports from Washington, this move puts thousands of people in danger.
The United States and our allies and partners continue to work in lockstep to ramp up the economic pressures on Putin.
The U.S. and allies continue cracking down on Russian President Vladimir Putin. President Biden announced a coordinated move with allies this week, putting new tariffs on Russian goods, hurting Russian exports.
Many issues divide us in Washington, but standing for democracy in Ukraine, pushing Russia's aggression, should not be one of those issues.
President Biden said Friday that the U.S. would, along with the European Union and the G7, move to strip Russia of its most favored nation status. That would make it hard to do business anywhere in the West and further sanction Putin, but it requires an act of Congress.
Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor, and Putin must pay the price.
Biden is calling on Congress to repeal permanent normal trade relations with Russia. In recent days, there's been bipartisan support for revoking that status.
We have a bill, a sanctions bill, banning the import of Russian oil and taking other steps to isolate Russia in the world, including a review of their participation in the WTO, the World Trade Organization.
The White House says Putin is to blame for issues here at home, among them high inflation and skyrocketing gas prices. But critics say the president's policies are largely to blame.
Putin is absolutely evil, and he is engaged in an unjust war against Ukraine. That is absolutely wrong of him to do, but you can't blame it on him.
As Russian forces expand their attacks to the western part of the country and a convoy closes in on Kyiv. In Washington, Seth Lemon, Fox Soul's Black Report.
Congress has passed nearly $14 billion in additional assistance for Ukraine with overwhelming bipartisan support. But there is a divide between the White House and some lawmakers over whether to fulfill Ukrainian President Zelensky's request for fighter jets.
And Vice President Harris is in Romania today to discuss with the country's leaders about the humanitarian crisis caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yesterday, Harris was in Poland, where she also met with the country's president. Harris's meeting with Polish President Andrzej Duda follows a disconnect between the NATO nations on the issue of providing fighter planes to Ukraine. The vice president says the U.S. will do what it takes to help Ukraine in its fight with Russia. She is saddened that the U.S. and world needed to hold Moscow responsible for Wednesday's bombing of a maternity hospital.
Pregnant women going for health care, being injured by, I don't know, a missile, a bomb, in an unprovoked, unjustified war, where a powerful country is trying to take over another country, violate its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, for the sake of what? Nothing that is justified or provoked? Absolutely, there should be an investigation.
The vice president's visit was a diplomatic response to a situation that angered some U.S. officials. Harris was acting as an emissary to keep the NATO coalition together. She announced the delivery of 2 U.S. Patriot missile systems to Poland. So there are some stories that have just been really shocking, so sad, so many videos that we've been seeing. I'm so happy that Vice President Kamala Harris took the time out to really focus on the maternity hospital, because that was one that was really sad to me. And also Tatiana Parabinas. We mentioned her yesterday on the show, but we didn't get a chance to dive into it. Her husband spoke about finding out that his entire family died. His entire family died. He found out about it on the internet. The only reason that he knew was because he could see the luggage from a photo. And so, you know, someone online said that, we're worried about gas prices and people are losing their lives and entire families. And so I think that we should kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about gas prices going up. People are losing everything right now.
Yeah, they're definitely losing their lives. And as we look at this, it's so devastating to see all the videos and the images that's happening. And I feel like it's the right thing for us to do. Look, we know what happened since 2016, right? People look at the U.S. like what's really going on with that country these days, especially when it comes to politics. But we do lead the way, and we have to step up and show we're going to be there for them in this situation. So it's very important that we do that.
You know, the head of the delegation in Yemen for the Red Cross said something today that I thought was really important to think about right now. How, this is absolutely a humanitarian crisis, but it is not the only humanitarian crisis. And this should be, when you think about just what's going on in Africa, what has historically been going on. She said this, just a quick quote. She said, "I think our duty is to respond equally to the needs and do our best. I think it's not about is it Ukraine or not. Now it's Ukraine and Yemen and Syria and Iraq and Congo and so on."
I agree.
Absolutely.
All right, 2 members of the Congress Black Caucus joined 15 Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene in opposing the House bill to ban Russian oil being imported by the United States. Cori Bush and Ilhan Omar are the only Democrats to vote against the ban. Bush says the ban fails to address the underlying problem of imposing sanctions, with no clear diplomatic process for de-escalation in the Russia invasion of Ukraine. President Biden and backers of the bill say the ban hits Russia's economy hard, killing off Moscow's source to fund the invasion. The 15 GOP members who voted against the bill included the most far-right lawmakers in Congress. That group includes Louis Gohmert, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and Paul Gosar.
A member of the Congressional Black Caucus says he's working with the U.S. State Department to bring WNBA star Brittney Griner home. Colin Allred says he's working with the Biden administration to get access to Griner. Allred says it's not normal for the U.S. Embassy to not have been granted access to Griner.
We have, of course, seen the reports. I cannot speak to the specifics of it because we do not have a Privacy Act waiver. But our objective is always to bring American citizens home who are detained in foreign countries. So that will remain our focus, and that's what we'd like to see the end outcome to be.
Griner was arrested February 17th, a week before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If convicted of illegally crossing a border with narcotics, Griner could spend 10 years in a Russian prison.
Last year, Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski voted to elevate Judge Katanji Brown Jackson to the second most important court in the United States. That was the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. This year, Murkowski says she's not sure what to do. Murkowski says because Jackson would be one of only 9 on the Supreme Court. The decision to confirm her is, quote, a different game. Meanwhile, Jackson continued on her meet and greet tour of the United Senate on Thursday. This time, she met with New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. Earlier in the week, Jackson met with Maine Senator Susan Collins, who praised Jackson's intellect and experience. Confirmation hearings for Jackson kick off March 21st.
Meanwhile, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch is endorsing President Biden's Supreme Court nominee Katanji Brown Jackson. Lynch, the first African-American woman to serve as Attorney General, joins 59 former Department of Justice officials who wrote a letter to Senate leaders in support of Judge Jackson. The letter praised Jackson's, quote, extraordinary academic credentials and her legal experience.
The Republican National Committee is trying to stop the January 6th committee from getting donor and supporter data from the software company Salesforce. The panel is trying to unearth information about how the GOP and the Trump campaign used email software to spread disinformation about the 2020 election. The committee says those lies led to the attack on the Capitol. The RNC says the subpoena is too broad in its scope and would cover information on its donors and volunteers. The panel has faced numerous lawsuits fighting its subpoenas.
A North Carolina man accused of attacking the U.S. Capitol Police with a flagpole will have to stay in jail. Justice Department prosecutors were able to convince a judge not to release 21-year-old Matthew Bedingfield. Prosecutors say Bedingfield faces multiple felony accounts stemming from the January 6th attacks. During the attack, Bedingfield was out on bail on an attempted murder charge for a shooting of a Latino man in 2019. Prosecutors say when he was on pretrial release for the shooting, he sent racist messages to others online. They told the judge it wasn't a good idea to allow Bedingfield to be on home detention in North Carolina.
The case of a D.C. police officer who took his life in the days after January 6th attack has been ruled a line of duty death. The widow of late Officer Jeffrey Smith fought for that destination for more than a year. The D.C. Retirement Board determined Officer Smith would still be alive today if it weren't for the events on that day. The ruling makes his family eligible to receive full benefits.
Former President Donald Trump has a bit of a history of bragging about how much money he has, but now he wants to spend someone else's money. The former president is asking supporters to buy him a new plane. Yeah, the request comes days after a jet flying him to Mar-a-Lago made an emergency landing when one of its engines failed earlier this week. Trump's Save America PAC sent his supporters an email asking for donations for what they are calling Trump Force One. The jet Trump was traveling in was given to him by a donor.
2 of the 3 men serving life in prison for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery are requesting an acquittal of their federal hate crime convictions. Gregory and Travis McMichael argue federal hate crime laws only apply to public spaces, and Arbery's killing happened on a private street in Brunswick, Georgia. The McMichaels claim prosecutors did not provide sufficient evidence for all 3 counts: a federal hate crime charge, attempted kidnapping, and firearms charges.
The U.S. Census Bureau says although its final count of Americans is correct, it miscounted the African American, Latino, and Native American populations. It says 331 million Americans live in the country. The Bureau says it incorrectly counted almost 19 million people, double counting about 5 million Americans, but the census overcounted the white and Asian American population. The count was disrupted by late start, wildfires in the West, and the pandemic. It then faced problems when the Trump administration moved up the deadlines to finish the counting. This is very disturbing to hear. We do understand that from voter suppression now to population suppression. I think it's just another way like to miscount those numbers. And we understand like when we don't fill out the forms, you know how we talked about it all year round in 2020 about the census form, how important it was, people that are still doing it. And now if we don't get counted for it, then it's really going to hurt our communities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes you kind of want to say, well, if you're going to underrepresent me, why would I want to fill out the census? But this should be a message to the Black community that, hey, if we don't fill out the census, we don't get recognized at all. And so, you know, white and Latino people actually overcounted. And so for me, I think there should be a recount because it was the middle of a pandemic. We were losing our houses, we lost our jobs. So a lot of people weren't even able to get mail. So how is it even fair to do the census in that year when so many people lost so much?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because the head of the Census Bureau actually ahead of even becoming the head, taking over the organization, the department, he told Bloomberg City Lab he believed the census was being sabotaged by the Trump administration in order to produce results that benefit Republicans. And so interesting just hearing that and then taking it to what it is now and knowing what the census means and what it does to marginalized communities, what could have actually gone down here.
Absolutely. And so, you know, we talk a lot about redistricting maps as well. The redistricting maps, they coincide. The census and the redistricting maps, they go hand in hand. And so Black people, if you are listening to this, I know you are as a Black Report, make sure you fill out the census. If it comes to you, don't take it for granted.
Moving on to our next story here, a bill to curb the teaching of racial issues in Florida schools. It's on its way to Governor Ron DeSantis's desk. DeSantis and GOP lawmakers in the state have pushed for legislation to prevent so-called critical race theory from being taught in public schools. Thing is, as you know, CRT is not currently being taught in state schools, but Republicans are fighting against it anyway. Proponents of the bill say it will prevent students and employees from feeling they are to blame for racial injustices in America's past. Obviously, the point of teaching history accurately is not to make anybody feel bad, but the truth is, there are parts of America's history that's shameful. It's shameful. It should produce shame. It should make you feel bad hearing about it, learning about it. But there's also something else when I think about these bills passing and these laws passing is that it kind of comes at things as if history is already accurately being taught. It's not. We're not starting at a great point to begin with.
Right. You know, when we talk about children who are not able to make up their own mind, yes, that's right. They shouldn't feel bad. But when we're talking about college students, pretty much adults, we know how to make up our own minds when you're in college. And so I don't think this is even something, it's a non-starter. But also, we have so many marginalized communities like the Black community. We're still, like you're saying, still fighting to get our voice heard, that this just makes it even worse and pushes us back even further than we were before.
Stories need to be told. Let's talk about the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. Can't that conversation come up? Can we learn where that came from, who that person is, what happened to him? The George Floyd Policing Act, if we ever get that passed, right? If we get that moving forward, people should want to discuss who is George Floyd? What happened? Why is his name on the bill? These are things that need to be talked about, and you can't keep pushing under the carpet or saying we don't want to discuss it, because we have to talk about what's going on, the good, the bad, and the ugly here.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Romeo. Georgia Republicans are coming up with their own version of the Don't Say Gay bill. State senators introduced a bill that would bar teachers from teaching about sexual orientation in public schools. It mimics the Florida bill that is expected to go into effect in July. But the Georgia bill has little chance of passing this session because it comes just days before the end of the state's legislative term.
GOP-led states are working on new laws that will make it more difficult for women to get abortions. The Missouri provision would allow citizens to sue anyone who helps a Missouri resident get an abortion in another state. The law follows Texas' ban on abortions after 6 weeks. Women in the Lone Star State have been able to get the procedure by traveling to other states. Planned Parenthood clinics in states that border Texas have reported an increase of patients by 800%.
A group of formerly incarcerated people at a Los Angeles County detention facility are suing the county. They say they were teens when they were victimized in the 1990s through the early 2000s. The suit alleges at least 10 staff members at Camp Scott repeatedly sexually abused children, girls, in their custody. The women say staff watched girls shower, and they say it then escalated to sexual abuse even after one girl was released from custody.
New York State is about to give out its first licenses to sell retail marijuana, and the first people to get them have to have been convicted of a marijuana offense in the past. 100 licenses will be given to people who will thereafter have access to stockpiles of the drug grown by local farmers. The early licenses will also go to relatives of people convicted of a marijuana offense. Governor Kathy Hochul says it's a way to help communities that were negatively affected by the nation's decade-long war against cannabis. As you know, African Americans and Latinos have been the victims of these marijuana laws. And so what's awesome about this is going to be ever before seen law that's happening. So like I said a little bit in the story, in New York, Black and Latino residents pretty much are the ones who bear the brunt of being arrested on marijuana charges. But what's awesome about this is that I like that it's going to focus on the people that might have been left behind. And they're not going to just hand out these licenses. You have to go through an evaluation based on your business plan, your experience in retail. So it's going to be a nice little structured process here to the people. And it's also a nice legal way for people to make money for their families.
So they're righting the wrongs of the past. That's what they said they're going to do, huh? But what about the people that are still behind bars? Like I was talking about a young man yesterday that got life for selling marijuana, and then you understand how it's legal in states now. So I'm okay with this, but there's still a lot of work to be done as they continue to make this legal.
You know, this has been actually one of the biggest criticisms in other states as, you know, these states start to pass these laws and legalize marijuana, because that is part of the conversation. But yeah, that this disproportionately has affected Black communities, Latin American communities, but they're last in line when it comes to, you know, something upended your life when it was illegal, and now that it's legal, you can't even begin to make legal money from it. And that's been one of the biggest criticisms. So it's like, you know, on one hand, yes, I see what's happening here. On the other hand, like what Romeo said, there is a multifaceted approach to righting the overall wrong when it comes to the impact of marijuana laws in our country, and there are a bunch of different pieces of it.
You know, I think making legal money, a lot of people it's a pandemic right now. We're still in the pandemic. We're not out of the clear with the pandemic. And so I think the opportunity to be able to make that money for your family is just going to change a lot of lives.
Yeah, they could do that, but they got a lot of work to do. We do know that.